Okay. مساء الخير. Good evening. Thank you very much for being with us today. My name is Noha El-Mikawi. I am the Dean of the School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the American University in Cairo. And the school I'm honored to work in, as the name says, is interested not only in public policy and public administration, but also in global affairs. We also have a department for journalism and mass communication, a department for international human rights law and comparative law, and we have centers of research, training, and they offer academic degrees, and these are the Center for Migration and Refugee Studies, whose director is with us here in the room, Dr. Ibrahim Awad. We also have a Center for TV Journalism and a Center for American Studies. If you care to follow our knowledge production of the School of Global Affairs and Public Policy, I encourage you to check our website regularly at GAP at AUC. GAP is the abbreviation of Global Affairs and Public Policy. There you will find a wonderful journal on global affairs called Cairo Review of Global Affairs, where we enlist incredibly interesting, thoughtful, and balanced Arab, Egyptian, and international authors on issues that concern us and our region. So check that journal regularly. We produce 4 issues a year. And again, I thank you all for being with us tonight. It's not only that we are here talking about an issue of global affairs, which is the upcoming German federal elections on February 23rd. But we're talking about the biggest economy in Europe, that is Germany, a very important trade partner to Egypt. The entire European region is an important trade partner to Egypt and to the Middle East. They are our immediate neighbors. Hence, what's good for us is good for them. What's bad for us, they feel very well, either through waves of migration or otherwise. And it goes also the other way around. What's good for them affects us well, and what's bad for them also affects us, often not so well. Hence our interest in this big economy called Germany, a leader of the European Union, and the entire European continent is at the moment very much part of a global conversation between the United States and Russia and the United States and China. So it's at the heart of global tensions, as well as it being an immediate neighbor of Egypt and the Arab world, and hence our interest in this topic today. The elections, coming up very soon in 3 days, are expected to shift the political landscape in Germany. What does that all mean for us? The implications of that on us? But more importantly, why is there such a struggle in such a big country, reflecting a bigger political struggle that is happening across Europe and across the democratic world? So I have with me here 2 excellent minds known for their balanced, rigorous analysis and very good and deep knowledge of German politics. They will hopefully help us tonight understand what is going on in Germany internally, what does it mean, and maybe some of the implications they can give us as to what it will mean to us in the near future. With me is Dr. Ronja Schiffer, currently the director of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, Cairo office, knows the region very well, alongside her knowledge of other regions of the world, such as in South America. Friedrich Ebert Foundation is a political foundation of the Social Democratic Party in Germany. Ronia is an expert on governance and politics, as well as climate and energy politics. Again, an issue of great importance in our relationship to the European Union and the European continent. Dr. Amr Hamzawi, who has just arrived in Cairo this morning, so we thank him very much for being with us, is of course a well-known intellectual to us all, former Associate Professor of Political Science at Cairo University and Professor of Practice here at AUC, and currently the Director of the Middle East Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. I thank them very much for being with us today. Alhamdulillah, salama ya Amr. And we will start off by me asking each one of the speakers to give us a kickoff speech of about 10 minutes that summarizes the headlines in their mind about what is happening in Germany now, what does it mean, and if they don't come to the point of what does all that imply, we will ask that question about implications in the session where I open up and get your comments, questions, and observations from them. So let's first invite them to give us their headlines of how they understand what's going on in Germany right now as we speak. Be very merciful on our speakers. They cannot give you any prediction of what will happen 3 days from now, but they certainly have a wealth of information to help us understand why this is happening as it is right now and what the implications are. Ronia, let me start off with you. What's happening there now and what's your assessment of it, and explain it to us a little bit.
Okay. First of all, thank you for the nice introduction. I think it's a very important topic, and I'm very, very happy that you were able to bring us here together to express a little bit our perspectives on the elections, on what is happening. Let me start by saying it's very difficult to put my thoughts into 10 minutes when it comes to how did we get to these elections, because it's an incredibly complex topic. But I will mostly be focusing on disillusionment with the traditional parties that we have in Germany, in particular the Volksparteien, as they're called, like the parties of the grand population, as well as a certain radicalization from the youth perspective. These are going to be the two main topics I'm focusing on, and then Dr. Arma will talk about some other aspects of this. Why do I choose to talk about it? And I always think that no analysis can be neutral. I'm a millennial myself. I was born post-reunification in Germany, which is an important information for you. Why? Because I grew up in a Germany where we didn't have a wall, we didn't have a separation, economy was well, the European Union was working well, we all thought we have peace forever, we're going to have a wonderful economic union, and this is how it's going to go. And then 2008 happened. 2008, I was still in high school, and suddenly there was a financial crisis. In Germany, the discourse changed, and then we had 2011 to 2013 in particular, that the discourse when it came to the European Union continued to change to a more negative feeling. So there were more and more issues when it came to economic prosperity. And then for example, the AfD was actually founded. And then we had 2015, which for me up until now is a very, very defining moment in German history. Because Angela Merkel came out and said, we can do it. There is a big flow of migrants, of refugees, and we can do it. And this is all very, very important for my analysis. So I really want to share these informations with you. When it comes to the elections, there are several topics that are really defining the discourse, the political discourse in Germany today. When it comes to the economy, we're talking about insecurities, a rising split between the ultra-rich and the poor. So the middle class is really becoming less and less prominent, or they have the feeling they are less and less prominent in the political discourse. We have lack of investment, both from a state level as well as from a private level, into the German economy. And so there's a lot of fear within the German population how the economy is gonna get out of a recession and how we're gonna start anew. When it also comes to migration, this is a very, very big topic. Why? Germany, we actually need 250,000 highly skilled workers to migrate to Germany a year in order to be able to keep our social state alive. Now that is a very, very heavy number. It's a very high number. And that is in direct contrast with Germany that is moving further and further to the right. You have more and more anti-immigration discourse in the German media and the German politics as well. And also within society, you have more and more people that are openly saying they're so-called good and bad migrants, and we only want the good ones. This in addition to several attacks in the last few months, which were linked to individuals as well as certain groups. Some of them linked to people with a refugee background, have really incinerated the debate. Now, one thing that really has become less prominent is climate change. Not in the minds of the people, and in particular the youth, but in politics and this election campaign, climate change is not being voiced. And this is also one of the aspects that is missing when we are coming to political discourse. And another aspect, which is foreign politics, and particularly the European Union. So we're talking about security politics. The European Union has been shaken by the war on Ukraine. We are talking a lot about defensive topics. We're talking about armament. We're talking about a European army. In addition to having veto power by certain states when it comes to these kind of decisions. So there is a lot of frustration when it comes to the European Union. And there is a securitization of foreign politics. Now, when we talk about disillusionment, we talk about the lack of representation. So when you have a look at the Bundestag in particular, actually when it comes to age, it's relatively representative. The median age in the current Bundestag is around 47 years old, while the median age in Germany is 44 years old. However, when we look at other aspects such as education, we have an overrepresentation of highly educated people and parliamentarians, and an underrepresentation of workers. And also when we come to two other aspects, one of them is women versus men. So we have an underrepresentation of women still in the German Bundestag. But we also have an underrepresentation of people with a migrational background. In Germany, we have around 30% of the population that have a migrational background. But in the Bundestag, we only have 11% of these present. So many people feel they are not represented in the Bundestag anymore. There's also another very interesting phenomenon, which is the decrease in party membership as well as trade union membership. So Germany has always been very, very organized when it comes to party memberships. People were active, we're going out for demonstrations, we're going out to all these events. And when you look at the last 35 years, membership has decreased sharply. The same with trade unions. So we also have this kind of feeling that less and less people are willing to use their free time to go and debate. Now, I might try to explain you why, but that's very difficult. But when we look at it, there is, and I really would like to propose to all of you to Google this after the debate, the political compass. So it's a political compass from authoritarian to libertarian and left to right. In German politics, the majority of the parties are in the upper right quadrant, authoritarian to the right. Even such progressive parties as the Greens and the Social Democrats at this point are there. And to compare it a little bit to the US, because many people don't understand the German parties, the CDU, CSU, the conservatives, are closer to the positions of J.D. Vance and Donald Trump, while the Greens and the SPD are relatively close to the positions of Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. Now I want to give you some examples of the parties. When we look at the CDU is an interesting example because they are lacking support. So when we think about 15 years ago, the CDU, CSU would get to 45%. Now we're talking 25 to 30%, depending on the election. Why? You had a party that was under Angela Merkel in power. You had a party that with Angela Merkel was relatively, for the conservatives, towards the middle. And you had a chancellor that sat in one of the biggest crises that many people felt, 2015, when many migrants were around the European Union. We can do it together. You had a moderate kind of rhetoric there. Now we have Friedrich Merz, who is a chancellor candidate and the party leader that has openly called or has openly done or destroyed the so-called Brandmauer, which is it's a firewall which has been destroyed by working with the AfD in the Bundestag. The AfD is the far-right party. It's in part a fascist party in Germany. So they have lost quite some support there. When we look at the SPD is a party of the workers. That is traditionally the clientele that the SPD has always worked for. However, in the last years, when it comes to social politics, they have really failed in addressing, or many people feel like they have failed in addressing the needs of the working class. And so many of the working class voters have actually moved to the AfD. When we come to the Green Party, when it was founded on two principles: peace and climate change. When we look at the current debates, climate change is almost absent. And on the other hand, many people are actually saying the Green Party is a warmongering party when it comes to Ukraine. And here it's really, really important that youth, when it comes to the Green Party, have really moved away from them. The previous head of the Young Greens has actually came out this week saying she's going to vote for the Left Party and not for the Green Party. Now the Liberals, let me make it short. They are not seen fit to govern because of several examples where they failed to do so. The AfD is very popular at the moment, second strongest party predicted for the elections. They have in part fascist rhetoric. They have people within the party that are, by court, you are allowed to call them fascists, and they just had to dissolve their youth organization for being considered extremist. Maybe one very famous thing that they just did, they sent out flight tickets, flyers that look like flight tickets to people with migration, like names that could lead to a migrational background, asking them somehow to leave the country. This is the kind of rhetoric they use. And now maybe the last thing I want to mention is the left. The left party has been for many seen as they're not going to come into the next parliament, they're going to be out. And then last year something really interesting happened. They split with part of their party. It's called the Alliance of Sarah Wagenknecht. And it actually allowed them to kind of redefine themselves and reimagine themselves. And then in the last 4 weeks, the left has become a lot more popular. And it is expected not only that they're going to be in the next Bundestag, but that they're actually going to be quite above the 5% at the moment. So we're expecting, I would say, 5 to 7%, which is quite the difference to the past. So now when you look at all of this, you have an aging population in Germany, where still the CDU, CSU are still profiting off quite well. Well, you have a youth that is a lot more radical. So when you ask, it's a non-representative survey, but when you asked people below the age of 18 in Germany, who would they vote for? 21% would vote for the left. That is an incredible amount of number. Again, it's not a representative study, but around 170,000 people were asked. The Green Party, which in 2021 was still the most prominent, is now at 12% there. And the Liberals are at 3.4%. So that's also a very interesting shift. And when we look at that, this has a lot to do with also youth movements in Germany becoming more radical. We had movements such as Fridays for Future and Extinction Rebellion that actually became famous for gluing themselves onto streets and being physically attacked by people. And this is something that cannot be underlined enough. When parts of the government called these people that glued themselves to the streets terrorists, they really, really caused a rift between these youth movements that feel so desperate when it comes to climate change and other topics that they feel like the politicians aren't doing what they need to do, and they're really trying to bring attention to something so important. And for that, they are called terrorists. For that, they are being put in front of courts. This has also led there to the growing feeling of youth. They are not represented and understood. And I'll keep it at that.
Thank you very much, Ronia, for giving us a very quick fly over a very complex political landscape. I'd like to remind you all of the fact that this complex shift where Volksparteien, parties of the center that used to collect votes from the center of the political spectrum are losing to parties on the extremes. And this is a shift that is happening in Germany and in other countries of Europe, as well as in the United States. It should give us all food for thought, because liberal democracy as we know it is changing as we speak, or at least its political landscape is. What does this all mean to policies on issues that concern us? We will come to that in the second round, but before we come to that point about specific policies that concern our region, I will ask Dr. Amr Hamzawi to give us his own reading of the current situation and why we are here. And Amr, before you speak, I would like to tell our participants online that I will be monitoring the chat room. If they feel like asking any question or making any comment, please feel free to write it down in the chat room, and I'll be reading your comments when we open up for conversation. Amr, over to you. What's your reading?
Thank you so much, Noah. Masai al-Khair. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. And it's great to see friends in the Oriental Hall. Dr. Ibrahim, thank you so much for coming. And my dear friends, Muhammad and Shahir in the back row. Good to see you. And good to be back to the AUC. And as always, great to be in Cairo. It's a troubling time. I'm going to start by trying to frame the election scene in Germany in an anecdotal fashion using two events of the last days. The first event is happened last week in Munich during the Munich Security Conference. It's an annual conference to which heads of state, prime ministers, presidents, foreign ministers are invited to discuss over a weekend in an extremely nice hotel in Munich world affairs. As always, the US Vice President is invited to the Munich Security Conference. This time, of course, J.D. Vance arrived to Munich and was supposed to give a speech on his administration's foreign policy. He, of course, did not address foreign policy in a speech which extended over 20 minutes, 20 to 25 minutes. He did not address foreign policy. He actually started lecturing Europeans, primarily German politicians who were in the room, about democracy. And so now I'm going to paraphrase what he said, not really quoting him verbatim, but paraphrasing what he said, which went to the effect of J.D. Vance seeing as the greatest danger facing Europe, not Russia, not the war in Ukraine, not questions of climate change, not questions of global security, but the silencing of multiple voices within European countries, and his reference was to the far right. So he pushed forward a narrative which has been used in the US by Trump supporters, by the far right in the US, that liberal democracies are facing a crisis in the West, in Europe and in the US, not because of the economy, not because of welfare systems which are no longer functioning as good as they functioned or worked a couple of years ago, but primarily because of liberal democracies not being true to their democratic ideals and values and not letting far-right movements and parties be part of not only formal politics, but be part of coalition building and the dealing and wheeling of governance. This was a remarkable moment in which, at best, a populist politician, an elected politician, of course, a populist politician, J.D. Vance, was out there trying to make an argument for what he perceives to be democratic values in a highly contested way. He pushed forward a set of democratic norms and values, which I believe many of us here in the room, many in Germany, will not subscribe to. The second event is, in fact, a very recent statement by Ursula von der Leyen, who is the head of the EU Commission. She was commenting on a set of economic and financial reports that were released last week in Brussels, in which, for the first time, Germany, which, as Noha mentioned, as you mentioned, Noha, right at the outset of our discussion, which is the biggest economy in Europe, has been a driver of European growth throughout the last decades. Germany in 2024 is the least developed European country within the EU. The German economy has been shrinking for 2 years. In 23, it was 0.2%. In 24, it's 0.3%. But for the first time in 24, Germany is at the very end of all EU members in terms of economic growth. It's negative growth, which we're having in Germany. And the release of these reports does put in context the discussion we are seeing right now at in the public space in Germany approaching the elections next Sunday. To my mind, and here I'm coming to my main remarks in a brief way. Number one, I mean, these are 5 remarks which I would like to share. One, the snap elections, which will happen in the weekend on Sunday in Germany, are all about immigration and the economy. There are no other topics which are catching attention among considerable segments of the German electorate. We are speaking about 64 to 65 million Germans who are eligible voters, and traditionally speaking, voter turnout rates have been relatively high in Germany, even in comparison to stable democracies in Europe or worldwide. I mean, we have always seen voter turnout not less than 70%, very much unlike some other European countries and unlike the US in multiple elections prior to 2024 and 2020, of course. So the German electorate, as of now, seems to be interested primarily in 2 issues, immigration and the economy. And if the economy is easily understood when you look at the numbers, and when you look at a shrinking economy, and at a widening gap between rich and poor, because it's not only about the economy, which is shrinking, or GDP, which is shrinking, it's about the income distribution, which is happening in Germany in a way very different than the welfare state used to do all the way from the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and 1990s. The gap between rich and poor in Germany is extremely alarming. Let me share two figures which are important to keep in mind. Unemployment rates in Germany as of now are anywhere around 7%. Of course, Germany did see worse unemployment rates, especially in the 1990s, over 10%, close to 15%. But 7% is alarming given the fact that we have a second extremely troubling rate that we need to look at, which is the poverty rate. The percentage of Germans threatened, I mean, here I'm really translating from the language used in German government agencies. There are different agencies which look at social affairs and questions of poverty. And the percentage of Germans threatened by poverty and social exclusion due to socioeconomic issues is over 20%, almost 21%. I'm once again stressing, this is not a percentage of Germans living below the poverty line, but this is a percentage of almost 1/5 of the population threatened by poverty. And it means that if you are unemployed or if you're subjected to any emergencies, that your livelihood is impacted. Related to it, child poverty in Germany has been on the rise in an extremely frightening way for the fourth richest country globally. It's over 15%, and in some places, especially in urban places, in some cities like Berlin or Hamburg or elsewhere, it's close to 20%. So immigration and the economy, number one. And therefore, Ronia's point regarding climate-related issues, which seem to have disappeared from German elections for the first time since the 1970s, this is quite a striking feature as well. And it's not only that the Green Party didn't do great in the coalition or did upset many of its core constituents while in the ruling coalition and not delivering to their concerns around renewable energy, around different climate-related matters. No, it signals a shift which is happening in different European countries away from conventional topics, as well as from progressive topics, which are now being replaced by immigration primarily and by different economic considerations. So, second point, this impacts the political party landscape and political debates and the elections in different ways. One, if immigration is the topic number one that is of concern for Germans, it means that what we're seeing right now is not only a right-wing party, a radical party gaining traction and is expected to double its digits from 11-12% in the last elections to close to 25% in the elections on Sunday, on the 23rd of February. No, but we're also actually looking at a political space, at a public space, which is increasingly drifting to the right in terms of how immigration is being discussed and how immigration is put in context to other social, economic, and political matters. Immigration, even from left of center party, mass party, Volkspartei, mass party, like the German Social Democratic Party, immigration is being increasingly securitized. This is no longer a sane discussion about the fact that the German labor market, the German economy needs annually, as Ronya mentioned, close to 250,000 skilled workers to make it function, to make it up to speed. It's no longer a sane discussion about how to manage illegal migration. It's no longer a sane discussion about what kind of balance is needed at the level of cities and Kommunen municipalities with regard to managing the influx in some years of big numbers of immigrants and refugees. No, it's a discussion about deportation. If you close your eyes and you try to leave out the place where the discussion is is happening, is unfolding, you would expect the discussion that's happening right now in Germany about immigration, which is centered around deportation and different ways of deporting more and more illegal immigrants. You could close your eyes if you could forget about the fact that it's happening in Germany and maybe imagine that it's happening in Italy or in one of the countries which, of Eastern Europe, which have been seeing a rise of right-wing populist politics for several years, or in the US. It's alarming, the degree of securitization with regard to immigration. And the economy, what's surprising to me as well is that we're not getting to see programs or prescriptions from political parties to address what's really at stake. There are big statements coming from the Christian Democrats that they will come in and fix it. And of course, they are banking on the fact that the Christian Democrats in German history as a party has always had the greater competency in economics, traditionally. So they are appealing to the identity of them being a competent and economic strong political party and close to the private sector, close to business elites and so on and so forth. But there are no prescriptions. If you read party programs of the Christian Democrats or even of the Liberal Party, it's extremely rudimentary what they are suggesting. Tax cuts, tax cuts, tax cuts. How is it going to impact the economy? You're not told as a voter. How is it going to impact social question and social affairs and the growing gap between rich and poor and the poverty rates? You're not told. But the Social Democrats are exactly doing the same too. They are speaking more about immigration as opposed to the economy. Every single attempt to have a qualified public debate, and mind you, this was a big difference in election seasons between the US on the one hand and European countries on the other hand. We used to have more of qualified debating about policy prescriptions in European election campaigns. It's not happening. It's extremely flattened. And this is a reflection of populist politics as well. Third and fourth point, I'm going to put them in the interest of time together. I believe it's quite interesting to keep in mind that the German elections are happening against the background of two narratives gaining traction across the wide political spectrum. One, anti-establishment narratives, very similar to the US. In a way, the appeal of the far right is, of course, related to the question of immigration, but it's also related to the fact that it's an anti-establishment force. It's coming from outside of the German ruling or political party landscape. Secondly, the second narrative is an anti-EU narrative, which has been on the rise and is impacting Germany as well. The fact that the bureaucrats and technocrats sitting in Brussels are deciding basically in an exaggerated way on life and death for German citizens without being democratically legitimized is impacting the German election landscape. Finally, and I completely appreciate Ronia's reference to the different numbers and expectations. I would like to highlight the fact that the upcoming elections in Germany are happening against the background of an amended election law. We still have a proportional representation system in Germany, but the amendments which were introduced in the last years and the amendments were introduced legislatively as well as paired decisions of the Constitutional Court in Germany are going to lead to less vote splitting and less diversity in the composition of the upcoming German parliament. I mean, right now, the parliament, which is going to be replaced next Sunday, did have a total seat number of 733, the biggest in German history. We're not going to see that anymore. It's going to be a fixed number of 630 according to the amended election law. And the number of parties in the parliament that's coming to an end on Sunday or came already to an end is going to be way less in the upcoming parliament. So we're going to see maybe 4, 5 big parties and 2 small parties winning direct seats. It's less vote splitting and less splitting in the party landscape within parliament. However, the distribution of seats within parliament is going to make coalition building in Germany for the first time extremely difficult. I'm not sure whether we will see a 3-party coalition or maybe a 4-party coalition, but that can be discussed later. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'll soon give you all the floor to ask questions and make comments, but I just would like to highlight in what we heard right now a number of very concerning trends. The first one being a shift to the far right in the political domestic scene in Germany is a reflection of such similar shifts in the rest of Europe, our immediate neighbor, as well as in the United States. And that immediately translates in what we heard from both of our speakers, an overemphasis of migration issues, but not in a realistic, factual, practical, policy-oriented way, but rather in very populist, almost anti-foreigners conversation and narrative. Populist and not practical for policy purposes. We, as the neighbor, have to worry about that. This shift affects how they will relate to us, framing all the relationship to us in a migration frame, and not policy-oriented, but security-oriented. Very alarming. Number 2, this was one of the countries with a very strong, as you heard from our speakers, social, democratic, social welfare model. We in the global south are losing such a model of progressive social welfare politics. We have to invent it for ourselves from scratch because their model is falling apart because of all of these economic concerns. We have to invent it for ourselves. That is also concerning. We cannot look for them as a model anymore. And finally, and then I'll open up the conversation, something we haven't yet talked about, which is Germany's foreign policy, which is again a reflection of European foreign policy. High securitization, militarization of the narrative, and complete disrespect of international law when it comes to a crisis like ours in Palestine versus a crisis like theirs in the Ukraine. What other people call double standards, which is making a place like Germany and Europe lose a lot of their moral authority as protectors of international law. This is also another area of concern for us. I thank the speakers for giving us such a good introduction into the complexity of what Germany is facing right now. And I will open the floor to take questions from your side. I'll take 3 questions at a time, come back to the panelists for responses, and then take other rounds of questions later. I see 2 hands here, 3. So that's my first round. Please go ahead. Do we have mics for people, please?
Thank you very much. I'm very proud to be here. Dr. Hamzawi was my teacher in Cairo University at one point. Thank you very much. And I have a number of ideas in mind, but I will focus on like a couple of them. First, when it comes to the center, it's more difficult to find ideas or to find new innovations in ideology or in epistemology even in the center. So it's easy to theorize to the far right and to theorize to the far left. So it's the problem of the center not being creative enough. Social Democrats did not bring recently any big intellectual, any big theoretician, any big new theory. Nothing something like the third way or something like that. This is not real. So that is one point. The second point is that my generation was fond of scorpions. The internet said they are German. So the idea of presenting Germany as an intellect to the world is not as much as it used to be in history. We don't say, this is Germany. If you come to Germany and become German, you can be like Hegel, you can be like Goethe. This is a challenging thing. So to become stronger in Europe, there should be a way to tell the center that Germany can lead Europe without being so ethnocentric, without being fascist. It can be leading Europe through the intellect of the German invention, the German mind, which can assimilate other people, because there are Marxists outside Germany who are better than Marx, and there are Goetheans or Hegelians around the world who are better than Hegel. So it's the idea of ideas and how to create new ideas and to be more of substance rather than symbolic, because the guys who glue themselves in the streets are finding some way of expression through symbolic, but we need to find intellectuals who do it through substance.
Thank you. Ma'am, please go ahead.
Good evening. I guess that also the role that the US is trying to play in elections in Germany and in Europe as well is very much special to this time. The comments that Musk have been also, echoing regarding the Chancellor are stunning. And I guess they kind of also, his image is very much discredited. And then also the Minister of Foreign Affairs, or the Secretary of Foreign Affairs at the US as well. I guess the relations between Europe, Germany, and the US is also developing in a very unexpected way. And that also brings a lot of, questions to security and defense of the continent. I haven't also seen how Germany is going to deal with the security issues that are very much timely, with a weakening EU, with almost all parties in Germany not mentioning the EU anymore. No one is talking about a coordination or a policy of the EU regarding migration or defense. There are some ideas here and there, but everyone knows that really everyone is fed up with the EU. And I guess that, this will bring Germany to be more active in more direct and bilateral relations with countries, especially in Africa and us. I guess they would be more interested to do things outside the EU frame, but I still don't see how Germany is going to face the security continental issues outside the EU and apart from the US.
Thank you for your question. I'll take Dr. Ibrahim, I'll come to you, and then I'll take Tahrir, and we'll do a second round, okay?
Thank you very much, both of you, for very interesting and enlightening analysis. I'll try to bring them together, in fact. You mentioned the retreat of the SPD, and Amr gave us figures about unemployment and poverty. So one first question, to which extent is the SPD responsible for that? To which extent are the labor market reforms of Schroeder at the end of the 1990s responsible for replacing a socioeconomic cleavage with an ethnic and cultural cleavage, which is now at the center of politics? And whether this, in your view, explains the shift to the right and the politics of and not only Germany, by the way, and of so many other European countries. So my question is, but this happens in different European countries. It happens in France, for instance. And the voters of the left parties have gone to Marine Le Pen in France, and they have gone to the AFD. But you mentioned a rise in expected voters of Die Linke, right? How do you really explain that? And is Die Linke comparable to La France Insoumise? I don't think they are really comparable. I think there are fundamental differences between them. But what is your view? Who are the link now? And you know, some analysts at some point said that the far right in Europe, they support each other until one day they may get to power, and then they start making war to each other. So this is extremely dangerous. It's extremely dangerous. And the threat to the world is not in the global south. The threat to the world is in Europe, in fact. So what do you think about that? And what do you think, as my predecessor said, what could be the impact of the arrival of Trump to power, of the meeting of Vance with the leader of the AfD? What could be the impact on the German elections of February 23rd? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim. I will ask the audience to be patient with me because these are heavy questions. So I'll come back to the panel, get some of the responses, and then I'll take the three hands in the second round. So thank you for your patience. Ronia.
Yes, thank you very much. I'll start with the question that is exactly addressed to the SPD and the possibility of the SPD being responsible for the rise of poverty, the situation of the workers' class. It is quite an interesting thing that when you think about the current social welfare state and unemployment benefits, you think about Hartz IV, which is the reform that was implemented by the Social Democratic Chancellor Schröder in 2004, which actually also led to his demise. And this is the system that has been ruling when it comes to social security and welfare and unemployment up until actually last year. Last year, and this was one of the major promises of the SPD, we will reform Hartz IV. We'll have this grand new system, which is called in German Bürgergeld, so money for the citizens, which supports citizens that, for example, work, but the money, the income that they have is not sufficient to provide the basics of life, as well as the people that go into long-term unemployment. And it was this grand idea of bringing people back into employment by having capacitation programs, by getting them back into education and having a more positive view. Now, when we look at the final result of that reform, it is a major failure of social democratic governance again. Because again, the law and the reform that they envisioned was something quite different from what is the result now, which is a Hartz IV that is reformed but not changed. This also, of course, has to do that it had to go through mediation with the conservatives. However, there is, when you look at how workers have voted within the last 20 years, a very clear shift away from the Social Democratic Party. And maybe one last point on this question. This also has to do with many seeing that the SPD is supporting people that don't work, that are so-called lazy, they don't want to be incorporated, they want to be unemployed, which is an absolute minority within the unemployment rate. I do have to say, when you look at the statistics, the people that are not willing to be integrated in into the labor market are very small. But many people in a populist argument are saying the Social Democrats want to give them money so they can continue to stay home and not do anything. And then on the other hand, though, low-income workers are struggling to really participate, to think about rent, in particular in the urban room. So when we think about Berlin, it's impossible to find apartment and living space when you think about other cities with a low income. And so there has really been this kind of conflict on that level between the poor and the little bit less poor, instead of between the poor and the middle class and the rich. And that is somehow also a change of discourse. And I want to say one more thing to the second question that you brought together with the second question that was mentioned. Trump is a big challenge to the European Union as it is, because Trump is absolutely acting in a way that is irrational for the European mind. They're like, well, we're the West. We have been always working together when it comes to security politics, in particular when it comes to Ukraine. We've been working together and we've managed so far. And now Trump is like, no. And I'm meeting, or my government is meeting with the Russian government without the European Union, without anyone on the table, not even the Ukraine being on the table. And he does it, and he doesn't care. The issue is, on the European level, is there anything that can be kind of put in front of him that will stop him? Will they be able to unite and say, okay, up until here and no further? And this is a really, really difficult question when it comes to the European Union, because the European Union has two major issues. Unanimity, which is a really big issue within the European Union, which causes a lot of disruption because countries such as Hungary, which in parts have illiberal democratic systems, can veto important decisions and nothing can be done. So there's actually, and this is where I would say the analysis, I would disagree with the analysis. There is a lot of talk about the European Union in Germany. There's a lot of discontent, but all the major parties, even the conservatives, are saying we need to get away from unanimity. We get to have majority votes, and we need to change the system we're working in. So I don't think Germany has given up yet on the European Union. Maybe I hand over to you.
Sure. I can use the same mic. Okay. Thank you so much, and thank you, Ronia, for your input. Dr. Ibrahim's question is key to some aspects of the ongoing discussion right now. So when you look at the Social Democratic Party, I believe it has been losing its identity gradually since the first decade of the new millennium, so since Gerhard Schröder. The Social Democratic Party, traditionally speaking, social democratic ideas, even all the way back to the 19th and early 20th century, have been at the forefront of creating and pushing forward the German welfare system. First, to offset militaristic trends, then to offset a huge and massive uptick in communist popularity prior to the 1930s and 40s, and later to stabilize right after 1945 in West Germany, to stabilize what was newly created as not only a liberal democratic government, but as a socially responsible liberal democratic government. And Schröder introduced the first major cut into the system and made the SPD lose a key component of its identity. The current chancellor, and I love, and of course, I mean, I'm not voting, so I'm free to say whatever I want. There's a very funny description of the current chancellor in German. So they keep referring to him, I'm going to say it in German and then translate it as the unsichtbare Olaf. So the unseen Olaf. No one really knows what he stands for. It's extremely difficult to say positively what he stands for. However, I believe he and his government, with the militaristic tendencies of the last year since the outbreak of the Ukraine war, have made the SPD lose the second major component of its identity, which is to be a party against involvement in military conflicts, against exporting weapons and weapon systems to war zones and zones of military conflict, and to be a party for the klassische Ostpolitik, for the conventional outreach to Russia and to the East. This is no longer the case. This is an SPD where I would be struggling to know where it stands. So that's part of it, of course. Second point to the EU, I believe while Ronia is right in saying that a majority Germans have not given up on the EU yet, but the amount of systematic criticism of the over-bureaucratized EU, of the EU that is not entrenched in local realities, or national realities, where bureaucrats in Brussels are taking decisions for German farmers or French farmers or industrial workers, is quite difficult, especially, it's not that I subscribe to them, I believe without the EU, a great part of German welfare and European welfare would have not been reached. But parties are not stepping up their discourse and their programs in defense of the EU, so they are in fact indirectly accepting the criticisms of someone like J.D. Vance from outside or Viktor Orban from inside. Final point, Hazem's question, a pleasure to see you, Hazem, of course, as well. I mean, the big ideas, I'm not sure that it's the right time for big ideas anywhere, be it I mean, the only one big idea which is in circulation is basically the massive undoing of liberal democracy, which is unfolding in the US under Trump and has been unfolding in different liberal democracies in the global South as well as in the global North. The one big idea I see out there in politics is an undoing of the liberal democratic order. Are there big ideas coming from elsewhere? No, I'm not seeing them, and I don't feel that parties, center parties, can benefit a great deal from that. They would, however, benefit from policy prescriptions. What I'm missing in the German elections are detailed policy prescriptions, even on immigration. No, allow me one sentence and I will close. Germany is not seeing the big influx of immigrants for the first time in its modern history. I went back and I compared numbers before coming to you. Germany had 3 major big influxes, waves, 1991 to 1993, right after the downfall of the Soviet Union and the former Eastern Bloc. On average, over 1.5 million immigrants coming to Germany from 1991 to 1993. Second uptick, 2015 to 2017-18, primarily Middle Easterners, Syrians, close to 2 million annually. And after the Ukraine war, over 2 million annually, 22, 23 in 2 years. Compare the treatment of the question of immigration now to how it was treated early 90s to how it was treated under Merkel in 2015, 2016. It's a testimony to political party failure. So it's not the sheer number, it's how politics and how political debates are managing or not managing the question.
Thank you very much. We'll take a second round of questions, and I see 4 hands. I'll start with Tahrir, then come to you, then take the hands in the back. Tahrir, please.
Thank you. I have a specific question, and apologies, I do not follow German politics that closely, and then a general question. The specific question, I think, Ronia, you mentioned, if I'm not mistaken, that the Greens are dubbed warmongers, if I understood correctly. Now, for me, I understand why they are dubbed warmongers, having followed the narrative on Ukraine and on Gaza. But the question I do not, my question is this a function of the current foreign minister of Germany, who I understand belongs to that party, or is it something, a bigger trend within that segment of German politics that people like me who do not speak German, don't follow the country that closely, are missing? And then the second question, it's wider, I think, to all of you, is I heard the word alarming a number of times about what's happening. I mean, to my mind, I think having seen what has been happening in the UK, in France, in Italy, in the Netherlands, in Sweden, let alone in Central and Eastern Europe, and now in Germany, and of course in the US. I mean, I think the word alarming, we've passed that long time ago. So the question I have, and probably as well, probably we overestimated the strength of liberal democracy in the West. Just an idea. But my question is, if we go with the assumption that we're really way beyond alarming, are we already crossed an irreversible point in European politics whereby 5 to 10 years from now, the decisive voice will be the far right?
Thank you. Good questions. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. My question is, in France, there has been a very fierce political crisis since last July after their last legislative elections, which has produced a crisis that has even led politicians to ask the president to resign and has led to the toppling of the government for the first time since 1962, since Charles de Gaulle. So my question is, I'm not trying to ask you for a specific prediction, but do you think that the next years will be characterized by more polarization, more divergence, more fierce disagreements where it seems like there's no way for the different sides to just come to terms or even agree about what the priorities or the national interests are? Or do you think there actually could be a way for people to have a better understanding and this polarization crisis could come to an end? Thank you.
I see those two questions somehow in the same vein, trying to predict the future, but not in the immediate election results, but rather the big trend in Europe, polarization or not polarization, the dominance of the far right or not. I see 3 questions in the back. We'll take them. Try to be brief if you can, so that we can give our speakers a chance. Go ahead.
Good evening. I just have a remark on this particular debate that we're actually having. Is that upcoming rise of populism in Europe, let's say, and the United States, could we go on and say that the statement or the argument that is mostly common among politicians, let's say, or academics, that the right wing is not successful per se, but because the left wing has failed us miserably? Could we, briefly is the remark that I would have. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I think you're very right with the so-called lack of discourse concerning very important issues in these pre-electoral times. So like you said, climate change and also some other issues. But I think it's not only the parties that are lacking in discourse and in trying to understand, to create more understanding between people. It's also the media. I think there is not only a crisis of parties in Germany, there is also a crisis of media, because the media does not criticize too much. They are just repeating. And that's why we have these rightist movements in Germany. Not only Germany, of course, in all of Europe. Or like, as a matter of fact, there is also an increasing anti-Islamic movement in Germany. Just recently, in the last weeks, we had the discourse about Afghans. And there were some, let's say, terrorist activities by Afghani asylum seekers. But nobody is looking for the roots of this issue, no? Because Germany, as we all know, some years ago was a big part in the campaign against Afghanistan with the NATO occupation and US occupation of Afghanistan. There was even this famous saying, Germany will be defended and Europe will be defended at the Hindukusch. No? Wir verteidigen Deutschland am Hindukusch. So it's now totally, I think it's quite irresponsible also from the side of the German media.
Thank you very much. I was wondering who will bring up the issue of the media. We'll take one more question here and then come back to the... Yes, please, go ahead. Shahir, and then yours will be the last one. Okay. Yeah, Shahir.
Yeah, one question is related to the question of media, the point Dr. Am referred to about society changing to the right. Is there an explanation as well about who's owning media? Elon Musk is buying Twitter, there is buzzword. How is the narrative is being that controlled? I think this shift, is there anything about monopoly of media, who's owning and this? So this is a question or an answer about what changed in society. And the second question with regards to the left, Ronya, you've mentioned that there's a 21% increase to the left, and Dr. Ibrahim asked the question, which left? Is it the dealing party? There was a talk about this party by Ms. Sarah something, BSW party. Is this still picking up? Is it like a new, or which left, and why are they moving to the left? And what kind of appeal from the left parties that is attracting? What kind of policies that is attracted by the left? Is it still on economic issues or in other, like similar in the US, there was an investment in identity politics. Where is the appeal of the left is going for? So thank you.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, please. The microphone is coming to you. Okay.
Thank you very much. I have a question regarding if you are also of the opinion that you think that there's a lack of real leadership in Europe, something that is maybe the opposite of Olaf Scholz, of something more like one voice for Europe that would make Europe more stronger in the international security discussions. And adding on that, do you think that the past coalition is also partly responsible for the rise of populism? And I think what's really interesting in this context is the argument that is made of Denmark, since they had a very harsh and strict immigration policy, which is maybe even too strict and harsh, some people say, but they don't have a far-right party. They don't have the problem that we have in Europe. And I mean, I know it's kind of a question of what, if the outcome outweighs the measures, but I would like to have your thoughts on that.
We are down to our last 10 minutes, so I hope you can share those. And the questions are very serious questions related to the predictions that you may have on the future dominance of the far right in Europe, the ability of German and other societies to fend themselves against polarization, and the very, very harsh discussion culture that is making an enemy of anyone who says a different thing, which leads to the media question and the narrative building dominated by the oligarchs of the world right now. So I would shift the order and have Amr start first. Give some minutes to Ronya if you can, Amr.
No, of course. Thank you so much. First, on the alarming description, which we've been using for some time. I mean, it's a spot-on observation. And I feel it's similar to catchwords, catchphrases, which we've been using in different ways. And actually, whenever we use them, we're not sure about what will happen next. So we keep saying alarming, you're right. But we also keep saying populism. And I'm not sure whether we can keep generalizing and putting Trump, Orban, and Heidel, AfD in Germany, in one bucket. And if I do so, where would I put Merz, Christian Democratic Chancellor candidate, who has been quite fiery in his rhetoric on immigration? And this is not only sort of right of center, this is far right as well. So I'm not sure about the alarming description. I'm not sure about the populism catchphrase. What I am sure of is that the liberal democratic order in Germany has been in crisis for several decades. This is not a new crisis. This is not an issue that is emerging now. It's been emerging for some time, and I believe it's in relation to the fact that welfare systems, which have carried Germany and stabilized society for a very long time, have been failing and have not been fixed, socially, economically, and as well as in terms of their political appeal to the constituencies in Germany. And secondly, that the crisis we're looking at is a crisis that, with regard to Germany, will not be solved only within the borders of the nation-state Germany. It warrants a European solution. This will not be solved only within Germany. Where we're going, I look at the last election cycle, AfD was 11%. I'm looking at the expectations for the elections on Sunday, and AfD is going to be doubling its digits to maybe close to 25, over 20%. Part of the discussion that's happening in Germany right now is that if nothing is being fixed between the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats to stage a real handling on immigration, and this is meant in a securitizing fashion, that we are going to see the AfD ruling Germany in the next election cycle, 4 years down the road. I'm not sure. I believe this needs and warrants detailed discussions, policy discussions, focus on prescriptions on how to fix welfare systems within Germany, and to reintegrate Europe not as a system of negation, not as a corrupt place, as an over-bureaucratized place, but as a place which has secured European welfare for so many decades. So Europe needs to be reinvented. The EU needs to be reinvented. Final point on media, the different questions on media. This is an extremely great question, and the impact of oligarchs owning media outlets and media channels, and in fact, dominating social media channel, not only conventional media, but social media channel, is an important issue in Germany as well as in Europe and worldwide as well. However, I am not seeing a trend to the right because of oligarchs owning conventional social media. What I am seeing is a readiness to discuss what used to be silenced before. Now it's okay to read descriptions of immigrants as being the sole problem of Germany, and of deportation as an okay policy, and of delegalizing the space around immigrants, basically saying we're going to freeze existing laws. That's exactly what Merz was suggesting. So this is where the impact of oligarchs and their far-right or far beyond being conservative mindsets are impactful for policy debates. But a correlation between ownership and the shift to the right, I'm not seeing until now. Thank you so much.
Okay, there's a lot of questions, but before I answer them, I do have to defend the Traffic Light Coalition a little bit. Because I do have to say, it's two factors why I think it's really needed to defend it. First, a crisis coming out of Corona and coming into the Russian invasion into Ukraine, which has really heavily impacted the economy, was difficult to manage. And the second thing, for the first time, you had a coalition of 3 different parties, as is, because the Conservatives, it's a union, I don't really consider them 2 separate parties, they support each other's positions, which also wasn't difficult, which wasn't easy. However, where I stopped defending them is how they portrayed themselves to the public. One example is that at some point, Olaf Scholz in the media was asked to be the kindergarten teacher to come in between Habeck and Lindner, the 2 vice chancellors and ministers of economy and finance. This is a discourse which I personally do not want to see in a liberal democracy, where we have to talk about the chancellor becoming a kindergarten teacher. The Green have been dubbed warmongers also from their own youth party. So within German parties, you always have youth parties as well. And actually the whole kind of lead council of that youth party within the Greens stepped down a few months ago in relation to the radicalization, as they saw, of the Green Party. However, of course, it's also a rhetoric which is, I think, personally in part related to the foreign minister, but also in general in the normalization about talking about weapon delivery, about talking about securitization, about talking about we need to defend our values. And in one statement that has been said again and again in Germany, if we lose Ukraine, Russia is going to be in Germany. And that is an overstatement that has creating fear. And the Greens have participated in that, as well as the other ruling parties, or former ruling parties. I want to underline something that Amr has said. The AfD is not looking for this election. They're not interested in this election. This relates directly to your question. we're not yet at the point of no return, I believe. But in the next 4 years, we are having a lot to observe when it comes to that point of no return. Because AFD's target is 2029, to be the main force in 2029. And this is, I want to relate to the question of coalition. After the election on Sunday, we might have a situation where the Conservative Party, together with the SPD or together with the Greens, will not have a majority, will not have over 50%. In a situation where we actually need stronger coalitions, this might mean we again have a coalition of 3 parties, which will be very difficult, which would be Conservatives, Green, and SPD. So again, we have very difficult times ahead of us, and I think it is important to see, will they manage to come together? And then I think we will not get to the point of no return. But if they continue to fight each other and they continue to open that discussion to the right, it will be difficult. When we also think about media, and I think this is what I want to, media and the left. Media, it is an issue that is growing in Germany, but I would underline what Ahmed has said. We're not yet at the point that there is no free media in Germany anymore. The discourse has changed, and the discourse is important, and it's important to criticize, it's important to observe. But we are not yet in, for example, the conditions of the US media, I would say in Germany. There is still a lot more standards there. And now my last point, because I didn't answer that question when it comes to the left. These are 2 things. First of all, that survey that I mentioned, it's not representative, and that's important because most of the young people are of more urban communities and that. So if you would look at actually more of the rural communities, you would have a stronger participation or a stronger support for the AFD. So what we're actually seeing is a stronger radicalization. And this is because the center parties are failing to be innovative, are failing to address what many people are asking them for, which isn't much, I would say. It's stability, it's knowing that I know to pay rent, and all of these aspects. And the left has 2 major factors why they're succeeding at the moment. And the one is that after that very contentious decision of Friedrich Merz to try to get an election, a law through with the AfD, they have been the strongest voices, in particular on social media, challenging that rhetoric, saying the far right is wrong, this is wrong to cooperate with them, we are democratic parties, we do not cooperate with far right fascist parties. And the second aspect is that they are really, really strong on economic policies, on thinking about taxing the rich, taxing inheritance a lot stronger, thinking as well about inclusion of migrants and what is needed. And maybe my last point, we haven't talked about many things, but our office is always open, so if anyone wants to continue that debate, please come visit us.
Thank you very much. We're coming to the end of our session, and here I would like to emphasize very much what Ronnie has just said. Yes, the elections on Sunday, as you hopefully have heard and started to appreciate, are a reflection of a very, very complex shift in German politics, and that reflects a bit European politics. But, as Ronnie has said, keep observing, because the real game is probably 2029, when the far right in Germany thinks it will benefit even more from a very troubled coalition that will be formed after Sunday. That's what liberal democracy, I would say, is all about. It's about this constant struggle to arrive at centrist policies that are inclusive, equitable, and fair. It's a struggle. It's never an easy game. But you have left us with a lot of food for thought that we may want to invite you all to come back to in future sessions. And I would just like to leave you with 3 thoughts. Keep thinking about that. We are in a world where integration of Europe is very important to solve European political and social and economic and security problems. We are in a world that is normalizing radicalization of narratives. We should fight all against that. And we are in a world where social justice is still a very important agenda for the whole world. So we cannot sit back and be comfortable with progressive political parties losing. So we all need to ask ourselves what's our responsibility to bring back progressive political thought. I cannot thank my speakers enough for today's conversation. I cannot thank you, audience, enough for allowing us to delve deeper into the politics of such an important economy in the world. My final point is the Atlantic Alliance cracking under Trump? I will ask this question next week on February 24th in a webinar session with two excellent minds in Egypt nowadays, Nabil Fahmy, former Minister of Foreign Affairs and former Dean of this school, as well as Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin. Try to join us online to understand more about what will the world do about Trump's second presidency, including what will Europe do about Trump's second presidency. Thank you all very much. Thank you for our audience online, and have a good night.